Hey, this is why I like Steve so much. I was wondering if this was happening, and the answer is yes. Armed militia groups are surging across the nation, and cops are joining them. Think about that.
Between armed militias and the police.
Best advice I would give you guys is you guys give us a holler, but take care of each other and main thing, take care of the people in Albuquerque. I mean, some of these guys are just dummies. They see crime of opportunity. I'm sure you guys can de-escalate just by talking to them. But obviously, without the uniform, they think of us a little bit different. So I mean, if you guys just talk to them on that level, I mean that would be great for itself. You know?
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thanks, brother.
My home driver, Erin, where are you? She's actually a spray paint artist herself. So we brought her here as a voice to talk to some of these artists and say, we understand that you have a voice and you want to get your message across.
All right, let's move on here. I don't know all they're doing here, but it's important to understand that there is a unity here. People want to defend their property and their rights. And if they won't let the police do it, the armed militia will definitely try.
The manifestations of this is an armed populism or an armed populist resistance that simply doesn't buy into the tribalist and cultural Marxist vision of Black Lives Matter and their cheerleaders among our elite media class. And so it's no surprise that we're seeing a new coalition building of sorts between law enforcement, who've of course been thrown under the bus by left-wing mayors and governors who've sided with the rioters and looters. We're seeing a coalition building between law enforcement on the one hand and right-wing militias, the armed populist resistance on the other. Now, this attraction of police to militias has already been going on even before the riots. There have been a number of articles reporting on the fact that indeed thousands of both active and retired law enforcement officers have indeed joined militia organizations over the last few years. And we can only imagine that that number is swelling at the moment, given how lawmakers were so quick to disavow the police and start spewing out their defund and disband nonsense. This entire anti-cop culture that's so pervasive among the left is not only, it's just surging militias across the nation. It's a surge that's been going on, however, for some time now. Back in 2017, PBS did a report highlighting a noticeable surge in armed militia activity and membership. Today, there are over 500 militia groups in the United States, more than double the number in 2008. You have groups such as the 3% Militia, one of the nation's largest armed right-wing groups. Their name, interestingly enough, comes from the notion that only about 3% of colonialists fought in the Revolutionary War, but were still able to overwhelm and defeat the major superpower of the time, the British Empire. You've got the 3% Militia. They have chapters in virtually every single nation, every single state in the nation. You've got the Oath Keepers. Again, what PBS noticed too is that many of their members are indeed current and former law enforcement as well as military personnel who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. So you may have heard of the Oath Keepers because they were the ones that showed up in Ferguson, Missouri, right, during the riots back then, the Michael Brown riots back in 2015, which, if I recall, actually started the whole Black Lives Matter movement. But Oath Keepers came to Ferguson to help provide security for reporters working for Alex Jones' InfoWars. You have the Sovereign Citizens movement. I mean, we could go on and on. But for me, what is key here to understanding this new bromance between armed militias and law enforcement is that it's all part of the continued political realignment going on in our nation today, which has been going on now for the last several years. Again, this is a political realignment that's going on actually quite literally all over the world, but it obviously has its own particular manifestation here in the United States, as it does, in all the different places in the world. Broadly speaking, the political realignment that we're seeing is what scholars call a populist realignment. So what we have to understand here is that populism is a different kind of political paradigm that we've been used to over the last, say, several decades. So, I mean, simply put, the paradigm that increasingly defines our politics is no longer organized around a partisan animosity between Democrats versus Republicans or right versus left, or even ideologically conservative versus ideologically liberal, big government versus small government. Instead, the new political paradigm that's dominating our nation is one organized around the new animosity between the people versus the elite political class. It's a clash between the ruled versus the rulers. And so what characterized populists is a deep-seated suspicion, indeed a radical hostility and animosity towards our elite class, our political, corporate, media, Hollywood, university elites, who are seen as ruling for their own benefit, for their own gain, rather than for the benefit of those they claim to represent. Populists are united by the notion that the customs, cultures, and traditions of a nation are best preserved when taken out of the hands of the ruling corrupt elite and placed back in the hands of ordinary citizens. That's the new political paradigm that's emerging all over the world, and it's in response to globalism, which is governed by a globalist elite, who are technically known in scholarly literature as the expert class. It's a class of technocrats who supposedly have the expertise to govern a single worldwide political and economic system, which we popularly know today as globalism. Now, as part of this political paradigm shift, if you're regular to this channel, you know that we've been analyzing how these race riots spread across this nation are in fact politically and socially realigning our nation into two fundamentally different groups marked by two different regional or geographical organizations. So on the one side, you have the increasingly tribalistic ethno-nationalist wing that's occupying both our cities as well as our political elite. So this is the pro-Black Lives Matter movement that is fundamentally ethno-nationalist. It's overtly racist, tribalist. They want to return to segregationist conditions where people are deliberately reorganized according to their race, with blacks and non-whites in general receiving preferential treatment to counter the supposed evils of so-called white privilege and systemic racism. So you've got that along with the cultural Marxists in our political class, our political leaders, our CEOs, our corporations, our Hollywood elite, our media elite, our university professors are all advocates of radical tribalism, but more in the name of this cultural Marxist understanding of the world. So that's one side of the conflict. On the other side of the conflict, in effect, you have everybody else. You have everyone and anyone who doesn't buy into this resurgent tribalism or cultural Marxism. And this group is particularly characterized by white working class voters who live in the suburbs and the exurbs. So remember, this is the constituency that gave Trump the election in 2016. So during the primaries, Trump won more than 150 counties where at least 8 in 10 people were whites without college degrees, working class voters. And then in the election itself, it was actually even more stunning in states like Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. We talked about this on a number of occasions. You had nearly 200 counties who defected from their unbroken pattern of voting for the Democratic presidential candidate. Nearly 200 counties that voted for the Democratic presidential candidate by a 20-point margin in every single presidential election since Walter Mondale back in 1984. They switched and voted for Trump by a comparable 20-point margin. It represented a 40-point shift, which was utterly stunning. Make no mistake, this voting base is being energized right now like never before because of these riots. And as a result, we're seeing new coalitions forming, new bromances, as it were, between what would have otherwise been hostile groups. In this case, armed militias and law enforcement. And so I think this new alliance has been a microcosm of the larger macrocosmic alliances that are forming that signal a surging populist movement that in many respects is only just beginning. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check.
So anyhow, it concerns me that the arms, you've got to be careful what you do with the arms and what you do with the laws. What concerns me is people are going to protect their own groups, their own families, their own situation in mass because they don't trust government, they don't trust politicians, they don't trust elites, they don't trust corporations or many of the wealthy that are liberal. But there are conservative wealthy and there are pro-conservative groups that are well-to-do, that are pro-nation. So there's a lot going on. Very dangerous times, to say the least. and we hope it turns out positive. There is much going on, but the police going with these militias and siding with them and encouraging them to work together, they got enough problems without having these militias come after them too. Think about that. Think about that. Again, this is Roger Martin from Billings, Montana. Christ is coming, and we are accelerating the divisions in this country and in the world like never before. Good day.